When Lake Erie is resurrected from the dead, or the Hudson River makes a comeback, they are hailed as big environmental successes. They're giant projects with a huge impact. But during the past few years, working quietly behind the headlines, groups of concerned neighbors are making a big difference in the life of many small creeks and watersheds. They may not get as much notice, but their efforts also have a huge impact. The partnership established to improve Dennis Creek serves as a model of what can be done in other watersheds. Dennis Creek is a success. It's a story of dedication and widespread cooperation. A story of many individual efforts that together have had a dramatic effect on the environmental health of this small community. The Dennis Creek story begins here with the Franklin County Watershed Association, an informal, loosely administered cooperative working group. They share a common belief that the watershed is a shared resource that benefits and impacts on everyone in the area. They also believe that through coordinated action, they can protect and enhance their natural resources. Each person in the association brings to the table a different perspective to the problems facing the watershed. Landowners and farmers in the region offer ideas and advice that reflect the specific challenges water quality has on an agricultural community's health. The various municipal authorities involved also have much to gain from stream corridor stabilization. One example is the incorporation of dry hydrants for fire protection in restored wetlands. Together, every perspective ensures a balanced approach to the solutions. Dennis Creek Watershed, part of the Potomac River Basin, originates in Hamilton Township, Franklin County, near Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Dennis Creek has its origins in the trout-inhabited Appalachian headwaters on Kittatinny Mountain. This watershed was identified as a project because of the pristine conditions of the headwaters and the immediate degradation of the stream once it flows into the agricultural valley.
The Conservation District looked at Back Creek and Dennis Creek watershed as one of the watersheds in the county that we felt was getting a lot of nutrient runoff from farming operations. As we would do field reviews for the Bay program, we noticed in the Back Creek and then transferring that up to Dennis Creek, a lot of farm operations, a lot of runoff going into the streams from feedlots and barnyard areas. The benefits to the community for the Dennis Creek watershed is everybody enjoys streams, everybody enjoys stream corridors, they enjoy clean water, they enjoy areas to hunt, and this would provide an area for the community.
The environmental history of the watershed starts with the clearing of forest land for agriculture, lumbering, and the iron industry, with no regard for forest regeneration. In south-central Pennsylvania, the major forest use was the iron industry. Beginning around 1750, trees were cut to produce charcoal to fuel the iron furnaces. By 1900, most of our forests were cut twice over. Wildfires, which were widespread, prevented natural regeneration. With the control of wildfires, regeneration created the forested watersheds we have today. Some agricultural practices led to serious erosion, and by the end of the 1930s, due to soil limitations and economic changes, farmers began to rely less on grain crops and more on dairy and beef operations. Soil erosion problems continued as more cows grazed along unprotected stream banks. Today, the story is much different thanks to the efforts of the association. Changes and improvements are making a significant difference to the Dennis Creek area. An important early step in restoring the watershed is keeping the cattle away from the stream banks. Cows trample the creek banks, stirring up sediment, adding nutrients, and polluting the creeks with their waste. The sheer number of dairy farms in the area has a destructive effect on the creeks and streams beyond their ability to cleanse themselves. Sometimes farmers, environmental groups, and watershed associations are at odds about how to restore water quality to ailing streams. But when it comes to Dennis Creek, they're partners. That's one of the reasons this effort is extraordinary.
On our farm especially, we see a lot of good done in stream bank. You know, the regrowth coming along, the soil erosion stopped, and the wildlife, it's only been a year, but it's been a lot of substantial difference in the wildlife.
Grazing livestock destroy the streamside grasses, bushes, and trees. Once gone, they're difficult to restore. And the loss of bushes and trees from the creekside leads to higher water temperatures. The temperature changes usually have a devastating effect on the fish and macroinvertebrates in the creeks.
The Dennis Creek project will improve the macroinvertebrate community in a couple of ways. One will be the improvement of water quality, in that there will be less nutrients and sediment getting into the stream. By lessening the amount of sediment getting into the stream, you're cleaning up the substrate, the rocky substrate in the stream bottom, thereby increasing the amount of available habitat for the macroinvertebrates. And therefore, by improving the macroinvertebrate community, you will also be adding more fish food organisms to the stream, which will be reflected on up the food chain into the fish community.
This is a real agricultural area, and most of the problems that you see here are probably agricultural related. One of the biggest things here is just the lack of vegetation that you see on the stream banks. And of course, without the vegetation, you see a lot of erosion, which you can see behind me here, high vertical banks. With the erosion, that puts silt in the stream. With the silt, it has a negative impact on a lot of the aquatic life. Some of the other problems that you see here is just a lack of overhead vegetation on the stream. It decreases the amount of shade that you get to the stream, and it does not allow for things like leaves and twigs to get in the stream, which is really the basis of the food chain. Probably the biggest and best remedy that we can do here is what we've done with the fencing in establishing a buffer, a naturally vegetated buffer zone that allows vegetation to stabilize stream banks. And that's probably the biggest thing you can do. And that alone will help a lot of the problems on the stream here.
Fencing the creeks and streams will help reduce many of the problems of the Dennis Creek watershed. A stream bank fencing program has become a valuable resource to the dairy farmers in the area.
It's kept the cattle off the stream banks, and they've been able to grow up a lot better. Where the crossings are, you can see the difference if you go look at them. The difference with the animals would be our nutritionist people tell us that we ought to keep them out of the water anyhow, helps keep the disease down in the udder.
Local partners are instrumental in Pennsylvania's efforts to improve water quality. The fencing program provides both fencing materials and stone for agricultural ramps and crossings. However, it's not enough just to install the fencing and ramps. A cooperative effort among property owners, sportsman clubs, and local citizen groups work to maintain the fences and structures. Once the fences help stabilize the stream banks, natural vegetation returns and trees can be planted. Tree planting and natural vegetation creates a buffer along the stream and reduces the possibility of contaminated runoff. Native warm season grasses, such as switchgrass and big bluestem, act as filtering sponges, trapping sediment and pollutants. Nitrogen and phosphorus are essential for plant growth. They are the main ingredients of agricultural fertilizers. Without a forested buffer, the excess nutrients flow into the nearest creek or infiltrate the groundwater.
We analyze our manure, see what nutrient in it, and then we sit down and draw up a plan how much we can spread in which field and things like that, and better make use of it and to keep it from getting into the watershed. We had some pasture area that we always pastured, and it would just get all trumped up. And it was too wet to really pasture correctly, but so putting in the wetlands, well, runoff water runs right into them, and that allows it to filter out any settlement and stuff before it gets to the creek.
Marshy areas are just as useful to filter and dilute excess nutrients before they flow into creeks. Unfortunately, the wetlands in the Dennis Creek area were long ago drained and converted to pasture land. Draining the pasture land also reduced habitat for wildlife. But the association has launched a major effort to re-establish these wetlands in the watershed. The newly restored marsh will be a valuable resource for wildlife habitat and function as a natural filter.
Wetlands in the landscape or in the watershed are part of the treatment system of Mother Nature as water moves from the upper part of the watershed to the lower part of the watershed. With livestock operations, most of the water coming into the wetland is surface water. And to start with, the vegetation is going to do two things. One is it's going to slow that water down, so some of the sediment and some of the solids will just settle out by gravity. The second thing a wetland can do is the vegetation, again, can actually physically filter some of those sediments and solids. They'll actually get tied up with the vegetation. Once the water is actually in the wetland, there's a whole variety of chemical and physical things that can happen in the wetland. If we have wetlands in their original positions in the landscape, we're going to improve the quality of the water in our streams. The other benefits of having wetlands are primarily going to be recreation and aesthetics.
Another vital aspect of the Dennis Creek Watershed program is the monitoring of water. Checking water quality is necessary in order to evaluate the success of the various improvements. A joint effort among government agencies, school students, and others works to collect samples for laboratory analysis. They also observe conditions along the streams, such as sediment, bank deterioration, vegetation, and channel flow.
The information that we gather on Dennis Creek, which for Franklin County Watershed Association, is very important because all the information that we gather is stored in a national database. It can be used by the entire nation and the entire public to be used as, say, a pilot project. People can use the information we gather here to better understand small watersheds and maybe even use it to develop plans for their own watersheds.
Each small creek or stream is part of a larger system. What happens to Dennis Creek has an impact on the larger watersheds and the Potomac River Basin. The citizens in the Dennis Creek area understand that relationship. They truly believe that the watershed is a common resource, its health a common concern. What the people of Franklin County did for the Dennis Creek watershed is both ordinary and extraordinary. It's extraordinary because the local community and individuals put aside their own interests, changed some attitudes, and are working to make the project a success.
The Dennis Creek Watershed project began over 4 years ago now. Even so, we're only about 30% complete with the project work we need to do. Considering that the watershed is almost 14 square miles of surface area and consists of about 8,900 acres of forests, fields, pastures, and homes, it will take many years before we actually complete the project.
Cooperation among landowners, farmers, agencies, organizations, and municipal authorities paid off. It paid off with recreational benefits like improved hunting and fishing. And there are increased educational opportunities to study the watershed, all because the long-term health of the Dennis Creek watershed is restored. What happened here is also ordinary. It's ordinary because any community can do the same thing. What is happening here can be accomplished in your community.
This project, in comparison with the other projects that we have in the state, involve the community much more.
This type of working together would fit any area of any part of the country. It's, like I said, local people working together to solve local problems.
It's been a real learning experience. We've enjoyed what we've done.
The Dennis Creek project is really unique. It's one of the few that I've ever seen where you get whole community involvement.
you can make a difference in the health of your local watershed. With trust and dedication, you can change your part of the world. You can improve the quality of life for future generations.